Hello. Today I'm going to talk about a little bit of a different topic than some of the other ones that I sometimes share. We talk about herbs on here, we talk about earth portals, and today we're going to talk about constitutional law. There's such a myriad of interests that I have, and the reason I want to talk about this today is because there has been some shifts and some changes in the last number of years. And some of those shifts and changes have been very prominent within particular nations. And when I go back and I remember my constitutional law days at university, we often talked about, nations with constitutions and then nations with what we would call uncodified constitutions. And there's actually not that many nations in the world that have what we call uncodified constitutions. And when I talk about uncodified constitutions, it often in a simple form, I'm oversimplifying this, but these are nations in which they are not able to pick up one document and go, this is our constitution that our executive and our legislative and our powers of our nation are based upon. And because of that, that can create some really interesting frameworks or non-frameworks of how legislative, executive power works within a nation. And I studied in New Zealand, and New Zealand is one of those nations. So hence why we learnt quite a lot about the supposed importance of codified constitution and the supposed challenges of uncodified constitution, but also potential benefits of it as well. My professor, I do remember, was American, was from the United States, should I say, and so was very concerned that a nation did not have a codified constitution. But there were also some other nations that don't have codified constitutions, and one of them being China, another being Canada, another one being Saudi Arabia. But the ones that we mostly focused on was obviously New Zealand, but also the United Kingdom and Israel. And so these are the main nations of the world that don't have codified constitutions. And out of the 100 and whatever plus there is of nations, supposed nations that there are of the world at this moment in time, there's less than 10 that don't. And a lot of those 10 are nations that many people, they know where these places are. Most people, even that are not geographically minded, can point to a map and go, oh, that's Canada, that's China. Or they've heard of these places. Some of these nations are big movers and shakers. And some of these nations have a lot of conflict. And some of these nations are built on some very interesting foundations or non-foundations. And so why is this important? Why am I talking about this? Well, I feel it's important that more people become aware of the movements and the supposed structures of which our human created law is based upon. And, we don't have to get to the nitty-gritties of the details, but just to be aware that some of these places don't have a codified constitution, and what can that actually lead to? So some philosophers will talk about, or professors, should I say, schools of thought will talk about how it's great to not have a codified constitution. Having an uncodified constitution means there's more elasticity and adaptability to what the nation and the global environment is needing and requiring. However, elasticity and adaptability also comes with challenges, especially when it comes to human created law. And the disadvantages that can come with is as the world becomes, I'm just thinking, being very careful how I say this. As nations are becoming more and more influenced by corporations, and less so by what I would call natural persons. There can be obviously a lot of influence coming from corporations, and they usually have different needs to a natural person, and not always, but usually. And so there can be more of a focus on economy, money, power, and not so much of a focus on health, environment, the evolution of consciousness. And I'm not to say that these things cannot coexist together. However, they are quite fragmented in some aspects of the world at this moment in time. And so when you don't have a codified constitution, there is less of a resistance to be able to say, no, that's actually not what our constitution has said. This is not what our founding document has said. This goes against it, so therefore we are going to say that we don't want this, and this is why we don't want this, and it may mean that it creates a little bit of a roadblock in the corporation's influence. Now, this is not to say that if you do have a codified constitution, that corporations are not making decisions that are not in your best interest. I'm not saying that. And it's also, even if these countries, they have these uncodified constitutions, but then to have a codified constitution does not necessarily mean that it's going to stop things like that from happening as well. So, having the uncodified constitution, it makes it easier for courts and legislators to disregard. If I could use New Zealand as an example, I will just ever so briefly, because that is my nation of more comfortability and foundation. One of the documents that supposedly makes up some sort of constitution, not constitution in New Zealand, is what we call Treaty of Waitangi. And that gets picked up and agreed upon sometimes, and then more often than not, it's disregarded. So it's not a solid foundation on which the courts and the legislators always stick by. They disregard it when it doesn't suit their needs. And when it does suit their needs, then they may pick it up and use it. And there's a whole other debacle about the Treaty of Waitangi and its own foundations and whether it was even created correctly, which I can go to in another blog. And I feel that probably I should do, because that would be providing a little bit more justice to the Māori people that were living there, and also provide us more of an understanding of how corporations, if we can call them that, back then it was more of the royalty would go about their business in their own way, and try and get around interesting nooks and crannies. Anyway, so yes, keep a careful eye on the nations that I have shared with you that do not have one document of a constitution. It's all uncodified. Like I said, UK, Israel, New Zealand, China, Saudi Arabia, and Canada. And you may have noticed in the last number of years that some of those places were making some very swift and quick changes within their laws. And they could do so quite easily, a lot easier than some other nations, because they didn't have a constitution as such to provide a resistance against, hey, like, I know you think you want to do this right now, but this goes against the constitution, and so we really need to have more of a discussion and talk about this, and when this is actually in the best interest of people, the environment, la. And then, of course, some of these places have a wealth. Some of these places have some interesting frameworks of power. And, some of these places are war-torn as well. So, yes, keep a special eye on those places. Oh, actually, now I just thought about it. Another example. So when I was living in New Zealand back in 2012, they had an earthquake in the city that I was living in. Quite a substantial one that really shook shook up a lot of foundations. The city was built on a swamp. Not a good idea to start with. Anyway, and there was substantial percent of the population were affected in a number of ways with this. And due to New Zealand not having a constitution, having an uncodified constitution, they were able to pass a lot of legislation very quickly because they could then pass an emergency. It's an emergency. So they were passing laws left, right and centre, and some of them were not even related to the natural disaster. I should be careful what they call it. Anyway, they weren't even related to the earthquake. But they were able to do all these other things because people were quite distracted with an event that had happened, and very much so. And of course, why would you not have focus around that? But also meant that all these other things could be going on in the background because people weren't as aware. They weren't as there's a name for it. When you have a vision that's very broad, people are a lot more focused. And people tend to be when you're in danger or when your safety is not there, your foundations are not there, your visions can start to get very. And it's a sort of a natural human way that we have sort of evolved to be. So yes, take extra care and extra attention if you wish to when there is a catastrophe, there's a war, there is a lot of limelight on a particular thing that's going on in those nations as well. So yes, I think that says enough for now. You're welcome to leave any comments and questions down below for sure. And you can also reach out to me on other social media platforms. I've got an email address there too if you want to have more of a longer discussion about this kind of topic. I've shared it in a very oversimplified way, but that is usually the best way to share these concepts, unless I'm speaking with those that are obviously in the legal industry. Then we get into the more of the nitty-gritties of it all. Yeah, so I will see you in the next vlog.